Right. Move that out of the way. Okay. Right. So what is a disaster? So any occurrence that causes damage, ecological disruption, loss of human life, or deterioration of health and health services on a scale which is sufficient to warrant an extraordinary response from outside the affected community or area. Okay, so this is loss of human life, very important. It can also cause ecological disruption, and it is on a scale that you need an extraordinary response. That's when you from outside the area. So that's when it's called as a disaster, and this is a hazard, any phenomenon that has the potential to cause disruption or damage to people and their environment. Okay, so we've seen that disasters can be classified as natural disasters and man-made disasters. Okay, and we see more commonly, and the ones that cause a lot of damage and loss of human life are overwhelmingly natural disasters, which can be further classified as meteorological disasters. Okay, topological disasters like your earthquakes, avalanches, tsunamis, landslides, and floods. And have biological disasters. So what we are currently experiencing, the pandemic is an example of a biological disaster. And this is how the UN carries out assessment of risk to natural disasters based on exposure, the susceptibility to natural disasters, coping capacities, and adaptive capacities. And the only factor among all of these which we cannot control is exposure. Okay, so we can always enhance our coping capacities and our adaptive capacities. And remember, it's poverty that exacerbates our ability to cope as well as to adapt. And that is why, though disasters occur in both high income as well as in low income and middle income countries, we find more impact of disasters occurring in those who are low and middle income because of our underdeveloped capacities. Okay. We've seen the effects of disasters, which include death, severe injuries, which require extensive care. All types of disasters have the risk of increased communicable disease load. Then you can have food scarcity, as well as it can lead to population displacements and movements. We saw a little bit of examples, and what we realized that was, rather than being reactive, it's better to be proactive. Okay, so that is why you are learning about disaster management. Okay, so we have actions that you can implement following disaster, and you also need to have actions that you can implement before the disaster occurs. Okay. Now, man-made disasters can be further classified as accidents, civil disturbances, warfare, and refugees. The problem of refugees, as you know, in many countries, this is a huge problem, especially that affects Africa, as well as we have seen close by here in Burma, okay, in Myanmar. You can have technological disasters. We don't see too many of these in Nepal, but we have known of enough of famous instances where these have occurred with disastrous results. Okay, war and conflict. Again, this is seen wherever there are areas of war and conflict, you will have outbreak of cases, similar to how Afghanistan still remains a focus of outbreak of polio cases. Okay, so as long as there's war and conflict, you cannot rest easy thinking that you have eliminated, because whatever gains are made can be, compromised because of war and conflict areas. Okay, so these are the countries which are affected by landmine problems. Then terrorism. This is the bane of our modern age of the 21st century. Okay, because of the destructive capacity of terrorist weapons. And we have, though the number of victims are much smaller when you look in terms of natural disasters, terrorism is still something that is done intentionally, and the primary intention of terrorism is to produce fear and panic. Okay, and these are the weapons, these are the potential terrorist weapons, and they can be categorized by CBRNE, where you have chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and explosive weapons which can be used to cause terror. These are some examples that we've looked at. And more importantly, something that we are more familiar and know about is bioterrorism. Okay, someone has their microphone on, I think, so we can hear some sounds. Thank you. Okay. So bioterrorism, these are the potential agents that can be used for biological warfare. And as I'm sure all of you are aware that smallpox, we continue to hold a small, reservoir of smallpox virus, which is kept in deep storage and maintained in two areas. And if this were to fall into wrong hands, it can create a disaster. So now we come to the core area of disaster management, of which we have looked at the initial disaster response. So again, even that I will just kind of just refresh your memory with, and then we will go into the remaining part of the class. So this is the disaster management cycle. As I've told you, if you're asked any question related to disaster, okay, it could be whether it's because related to earthquake or flood, draw this cycle, okay, because one picture can speak 1,000 words. So the teacher knows that you are aware about the disaster management cycle. So put this down. So whenever you have a disaster, what you need is immediate emergency response to handle that disaster. So you have all of the focuses, all of the resources will go towards response, disaster response and relief activities, following which then you will look at rehabilitation and then reconstruction. Okay, so this is the post disaster phase where we're focusing on recovery. Okay, after the emergency response. Okay. Now, in the pre-disaster phase, before this disaster has occurred or before the next disaster occurs, what we can have is measures to mitigate the risk. Okay. So when we talk about mitigation of risk, we're talking about risk reduction. And so you have measures to mitigate. Okay, so you always have a disaster management cell that is there, and which way you have plans in place in order to know how to respond when a disaster occurs, rather than think about what to do when the disaster occurs. Okay, so there is preparedness. Okay, so it's simple. As you can see in the post, whenever after a disaster, you can think of about the R's, and when you're thinking about before disaster, it's a P. So we've seen disaster response measures which are focused on saving life, protecting property, and dealing with immediate damage. And you have first search, rescue, and first aid, which normally comes from the community. So preparedness, when we're thinking about before, we can have measures in which we make the community more resilient and prepared in order to offer the first response to when a disaster occurs. You have trigger mechanisms, level 1, 2, and 3, which decides which type of resources are needed, whether the local resources are enough, whether you need neighborhood support or you need national efforts, or you need to call in the army. Okay? Then field care, about how to provide care to casualties, how to maximize the services which are available, the beds which are available, how do you allocate, where do you send the affected, the injured to, what about the people, the rest of the people, what provision are you going to make for food and shelter, what priority should be given for the victims' identification, what kind of mortuary spaces should be provided, okay, all of that. Then medical care in a disaster consists of triage, first aid, life-saving measures, transport and evacuation for definitive care to hospital care. Okay, so this is very important that you be able to think of providing all of this on site. Okay, so where the disaster occurs, you should have these facilities as well as transportation so that you can transport the injured persons to a hospital. Okay, so mass casualty management demands standard, simple therapeutic procedures, standardized drugs, and medical supplies. Okay, and so on site care is important. You also need to establish a command post triage team who knows how to do triage and how to tag the injured on the basis of triage, where you need to have a first aid team that provides simple first aid relief measures to the people at the site of the disaster. You can have a mobile hospital in order to deal with more simpler cases of injuries. Then you need an evacuation team, those who will take the people who are injured to the hospital site, and you need to have an efficient transport and communication system. Okay, it's very important how we deal with a disaster. Okay, so these are all the components of the medical care in a disaster. Now, triage. So we need a triage team. So triage has to be done at the site of the disaster. Triage also needs to be done when they come to the to the hospital or the healthcare facility. So triage, I'm going to repeat this again because this can come to you as a short note. Triage is classifying the injured on the basis of severity of their injuries and the likelihood of their survival with prompt medical intervention. Higher priority is given to victims whose immediate or long-term prognosis can be dramatically affected by simple intensive care. Okay, so unfortunately, during triage, during a disaster, the person who is most severely injured but has very less likely chance of survival, okay, would not get the priority. Okay, so and also as we have in our normal regular OPD where we have first come first serve basis, in triage they are prioritized, and based on those who can survive with simple intervention, they are the ones who are prioritized. They are the ones who are given the red category. Okay, and those who can walk are automatically going to the green category. Those who can wait for a little while become yellow category, and those who are not able to move, or we think that they are so severely injured that their chance, you don't get respiration, despite a head tilt. Okay, so they are classified as dead or moribund. Okay, so dead is when you don't get any pulse. Okay, and moribund is when they are not responding. Okay, so you have, this is the international, while like I told you, there are many ways of triaging. This is what is most commonly used. So the ones with a red tag are the ones who are a high priority. Yellow is medium. Green are the ambulatory patients who can wait. And these are the ones who can be dealt with, with all your mobile hospitals and all of that. Because you realize that hands on deck are very few during a disaster. Okay, experienced doctors, those who are able to handle trauma surgeons, emergency medicine, all of these people are the ones who respond. Okay, they are your first responders, okay, whenever disaster occurs. So you don't have too many of these doctors. And so even you will find like what happened during the COVID pandemic was all other routine activities are suspended and all doctors will be focused towards COVID. Okay, that's what you normally do. So as you can increase the resources. Okay, so this is not the time to go in for complex surgeries, but rather to focus on minimal, simple interventions. Okay. So this is the triage system and tags. This is one system. This is one healthcare which has adopted this kind of triaging. It's a simple, easy way to understand. And you can understand that doctors need to be trained, okay, on how to carry out triage. Okay. Tagging, patients who have to be identified. That's very important, okay, because family members, they may be with family members, maybe not without. So it's important that identified with tags that state their name, age, place of origin, what is the triage category, if there is any diagnosis and any initial treatment that was given to this patient. Okay. Now, an important component also and a very sad part of disaster management is where you have to take care of the dead, okay, because the identification of those who have died is also important, especially for the family members. So it involves removal of those who have died from the disaster scene, okay, shifting them to a mortuary. Sometimes if you have very large, you will not even get space in the mortuary. Okay, so where do you keep these bodies? This is what we have seen during the pandemic. I'm sure you have seen those videos, and even in cities like New York, which have these are high income countries with good facilities, because of the sheer number, the load of the cases, you had bodies which were kept in bags and which were lying in the corridors as well. Okay, so care of the dead is very important, and because this is what creates sensationalism, rather than seeing all the good that the doctors have been doing in a very hard situation, people will always be criticized over something that is not done right. Okay, so identification of the dead, and also having a place where you have relatives are received and then they are escorted to identify the bodies. Okay, so that's another aspect of the immediate response towards a disaster. Then we've seen about disaster recovery. It's a process by which communities and nations are assisted in returning to their proper level of functioning following a disaster. Okay, so it depends on the type of disaster and what is the quantity of supplies which are available locally. So, okay, it depends on the capacity of the local country. Okay, so reconstruction is a challenge that needs to be addressed because essential commodities also become very expensive and scarce during disaster times. Okay, then social reactions. This is something which is very hard and difficult to deal with, and therefore the disaster management team, the response team, okay, and the communication team, they need to be able to respond and give. That is why you have all these messages which are coming on your telephone about telling you about what are the signs and symptoms, what you need to do, because we need to dispel and we need to keep the people calm. Okay, so what happens is there is panic, people are stunned, there can be antisocial reactions, you can have looting, you can have rumors, you can have population displacements. All of these place a lot of burden, okay, on the administration. Now, this is not something that doctors look at directly. This is something that the political arm, the administration, the municipal corporation, if it's they are the ones who have to deal with all of this. Okay. And exposure to elements, you have to provide emergency shelters. Food and nutrition are very important because there is food shortage, people don't have to eat, so you have to provide, okay, distribution. So you will find that all the aid relief that comes in deals with all of this. Okay, food packages will come in, people will come in, you will have people who come to volunteer. Okay, so in a disaster, you will see all kind of reaction. You will see the heroes and you will see the not so heroes. Okay. Then, like I said, one common thing to all disasters is an increased load of communicable diseases. Okay, so you can have diarrhea, dysentery, cholera, typhoid. Okay, because of overcrowding, because of poor sanitation, if you have to people, water contamination. Okay, so you have diarrheal diseases outbreak. Okay, cholera, as soon as you have people clustering together, then you will have outbreak of measles, you can have outbreaks of meningococcal meningitis. Okay, also you have, because wherever you have increased breeding of vectors, you can have outbreak of vector-borne diseases. Okay, skin, dermatological conditions, okay, all these tick-borne diseases and all of that, these are all which have been documented, okay, following a disaster. So even in cases, especially when the Soviet bloc broke down and when you had a lot of these nuclear accidents which were happening, you also had associated, when people were put up in emergency, rise in plague, okay, outbreaks of plague. Okay, uncommon diseases also till now, which we don't see very often, you begin to see happening during a disaster. Okay. So it's very important that we continue to have surveillance and disease control, okay? Because there is overcrowding, there is poor sanitation in temporary resettlements, there is population displacement, there is disruption and contamination of water supply, there is disruption of routine control programs, okay, there's displacement. We know of this in Nepal as well, because even during the outbreak, you had people who were sleeping outside, who were open to elements, and you even had wild animals coming in, okay, outside in the outskirts of Kathmandu, okay, displacement of domestic and wild animals. You have ecological changes which favor breeding of vectors, okay. So because of all of this, you have outbreaks of disease. So it's very important that we implement as soon as possible all public health measures to reduce the risk of disease transmission. So you can see the burden, okay, already on healthcare. So you will have all the clinical staff being diverted to, to the care of the injured, those people who are coming into the healthcare facilities. And then you have the administration, which is burdened with looking at, and then you have the public health authorities who also have to look at controlling this or reducing the risk of disease transmission. And therefore, it's important that we have a good disease reporting system. We should be able to identify outbreaks. You should initiate control measures and investigate all reports of disease outbreaks rapidly. Okay. So as far as possible, it's important that routine, essential services get back into place. For example, immunization, healthcare services, okay? And at all times, that babies are born at all times, and we have a boom that happens, especially during this lockdown period. And so it's important that services be available, including family planning services for women, okay? So that's important. Now, what about vaccination? We are talking about an increased occurrence of communicable disease. So the WHO does not recommend typhoid and cholera vaccines, okay? Now, because this is not the time in which we should be adding to the burden of the public health by introducing more vaccines for them to give, okay? So mass vaccination of population is totally unnecessary. Instead, you should focus on, disinfecting your water supply, seeing that you have good, safe shelters. Those are better measures to focus your attention and resources on rather than vaccinating, okay, because you will need so many people to organize that vaccination, okay. Now, natural disasters, they can negatively affect the maintenance or ongoing national programs, okay, especially all your immunization programs. So as far as possible, you should restart all of the essential national programs, okay? That is important. Then in the nutrition, you should have immediate steps which ensure food relief. So you should assess what foods you have, how much food is needed, okay, how much do you need to take care, and especially what has been taken care of is pregnant women and children. And therefore, you have these packets and packaged foods and these nutritional supplements which are provided at the nutritional rehabilitation centers, especially focusing on pregnant women and children and also adolescents. Okay, so that's important. Now, when we look at, so that is all part of your recovery phase. Okay, and now we're looking at rehabilitation. Now, this is the final phase which would lead to the restoration of the pre-disaster conditions. Okay, so priority shift from healthcare towards environmental health measures. Okay, so now our whole focus on provision of whatever is there in the hospitals. You also have to look at water supply, food safety, basic sanitation, vector control. Okay, this is the one that will enable you to go back into the environment. Okay, so if you look at the elements of disaster management, the important part that you can see is all the effort that you focus into your disaster response, and what are the efforts that you can focus into reducing the risk of the risk of the disaster. So what we call as disaster mitigation. So as a part of disaster response, you have the response is relief, rescue activities, rehabilitation, reconstruction activities. Okay, and in mitigation, you can have being prepared. Okay, you can have disaster risk reduction. And of course, you can only have risk reduction when you have a good risk assessment. Okay, so you should know what are the hazards. Okay, what is the voluntary assessment? What are the structural measures? What are the non-structural measures? Okay, so the principles of disaster planning are you need to have a planned and a systematic approach. Okay, disaster planning, please remember, cannot prevent disasters. Okay, but what disaster planning will help you is that it minimize the effect by having appropriate plans and being prepared. Okay, so preparedness is important. Okay. Okay, so this is just, I put this slide here just to show you all what was done during a, okay, you can see, so you have NDRF. So NDRF is the National Disaster Relief Force. Okay, so they had to, this disaster was not enough for the state to handle it alone. Okay, because there were multiple states which were done. You had the National Disaster Relief Force. You had so many teams. Okay, can you see the number of rescuers, and you can see the number of boats and life-saving equipment? All of these were employed, and you can see that the Air Force helicopters were on standby. So this is requiring a national level response. Okay, so this is a trigger 3 kind of a mechanism, okay, which has been put into place, okay, because of the extent of the disaster. Okay, now principles of disaster planning, the key issues in disaster management. Okay, so very important, the 3 C's: communication, coordination, and control. Very important. And I think the best example for this, I think that really the person who really shone in a difficult time was Rudy Giuliano. Okay, he was the mayor of New York when the World Trade Centers were attacked. Okay, so when that disaster happened, he was the mayor. So he was the one who was looking after the response activities and, responding. He was the one handling the press. And as you can imagine, in the US, they have a very free and independent press, and they are answerable because they can be verified and cross-checked. And they were outraged as to how there was such a failure of intelligence and such an attack could take place. Okay, so and you can know that the deaths were almost 3,000 and more, and in America that's a huge number. Okay, so the way Rudy Giuliano handled the press is something that everyone really applauds. Okay, when he was asked what are the numbers, he did not quote the numbers. He said it is more than we can bear. Okay, and this was not something that he already knew, but his way that he responded, now he has become a classical example. And today management colleges are offering training on how to handle these responses. Okay, so people, whether they're doctors, hospital directors, or you're in ministers, or you're handling you're in the disaster relief team, they are taught how. Okay. Okay, I'm back. All right. So it's very key that we know how to handle and communicate important messages, not just take care of the press. Why am I not able to move this? Okay, let me do that. All right, so this is important. Okay, so disaster management, the 3 C's are communication, coordination, and control. Then in pre-disaster management, remember the P's. Okay, so you should be able to predict disasters. You should be able to prevent them or have measures for prevention. You should have good planning and preparedness. Okay, so these are the P's. And critical issues when disaster event occurs are the 4 R's. Okay, immediate response, rescue, relief, and rehabilitation. So I hope that's a simple way for it to help you to remember. Okay, so what is disaster prevention? Okay, disaster prevention, these are measures which are aimed at impeding the occurrence of a disaster event, preventing harmful effects on communities, formulations and implementation of long-range policies and programs. Okay, so this is disaster mitigation. As you can see in the community, disaster mitigation can be seen like a tree. Okay, it has different branches that you need to focus on. Okay, so these are all measures, disaster mitigation. These are measures which are aimed at reducing the impact of a natural or man-made disaster on a nation or community. Okay. So these are both structural as well as non-structural measures which are undertaken to limit the adverse impact of natural hazards, environmental degradation, and technological hazards. Okay, so you're now focusing on the hazards and you want to limit the impact of the hazard. Okay, so that is disaster mitigation. So in disaster mitigation, an important principle is that we want to prevent hazards from developing into disasters. And we want to reduce the effects of disaster when they occur. Okay, so this focuses on long-term measures to reduce or eliminate the risk. Now, the most cost-efficient method to reduce the impact of a hazard is disaster mitigation. For example, like I told you, a healthcare facility. Okay, now it has become mandatory that whenever you build a healthcare facility, that it should be earthquake proof or resilient, because we know that is the best way, that is the most cost efficient way to have a health facility. You can also have retrofitting as one of the measures. You build a facility and then you retrofit it, but retrofitting is going to be far more expensive than building an earthquake proof design into the plan. Okay, so disaster mitigation is important. These are measures, and we know that they have tried to implement this administration with limited success in our setting. Okay, so let's look at what are the structural measures. When you look at structural measures, you can have quake proof buildings, use of flood levees depending on areas where you have flooding. And we know, all of us know how important generators are. You know, all hospitals and healthcare facilities need to have generators because you don't want patients who are in the NIC or with babies in an ICU, patients in ICU who are on ventilator. Okay, you have a blackout and then these patients are gasping. Okay, so it's very important that you have generators wherever you have areas which are prone to electricity blackouts. In areas which are very prone to storms and typhoons and the coastal areas, then they need to have storm cellars. You especially see this in the western coast of America. Okay, especially Florida and all, which are always being hit with hurricanes. Okay, and typhoon. So you have constructions of storm cellars, and of course you can always have retrofitting. Okay, and I'm sure you'll have seen that with your hostel facility being retrofitted following the earthquake, the old hostel building. Okay, so these are the types of structural measures that you can have. Then you have non-structural measures. Okay, legislation. Okay, so you tell people where they can build and where they can't build, land using planning and insurance. Okay, so in the event of a disaster and you have lost property or home, if it is insured, then you can always claim that insurance. Okay, so that is a way by which the people or the affected regions can bounce back. Okay, so quake-proof houses, just a quick look at how these are built. Okay, normally what they use in quake-proof is hollow concrete bricks. Okay, the roof is made of reinforced cement concrete, what is called as RCC. You need to have pillars. Okay, you can see the foundation, which is largely from stones. You can have reinforced steel corner pillars which provide strength and flexibility. And what happens is this is a box isolation technique. So this is wherever you have areas which are seismically active, if they use these principles, then it may sway a bit, but it will not fall. Okay. And this is what we see that Japan has done very successfully. Okay. All of their things, right? There those tall skyscrapers as well in a very seismically active zone, but these are all built of steel and they swing and they come back to the place. Okay, you can check with people who have been in Japan and to their experiences of during a earthquake. Okay. So non-structural issues. What kills or injures people in health facilities may not be the structure, but the items and equipment inside. Okay. Their poor placement and storage can cause them to fall or roll, hitting occupants of the health facilities. Okay. So patients who are able to move, they can move. Okay. But if those who are in fracture or in bed who can't move, then if you don't want things falling on top of them. Okay. So it's important, okay, that we have whatever is mobile, they should be fixed. Okay. So you have mobile X-ray, these are rollers. So you have to hook these mobile X-rays to the wall. Okay, this is a simple way. This is a guidance, okay, for hospitals wherever you have mobile equipment. You hook them up, okay, so that they don't roll and fall on the technicians or on the people. Okay, so that's just an example of how you can mitigate the risk. Okay, now retrofitting. Now, the structures which are built in Nepal, they are not just seismically unsafe, but they're not even engineered to meet the basic building codes. Okay, we are all aware about that. Okay, so the ability of our administration, local administration, to enforce legislation is not adequate. Okay, so we have rules in place saying that there should be so much distance and all, but people just flout all of those. Okay, so forget about being whether they are sound or not during the earthquake. They're not even engineered to meet even basic building codes. And the structures which were built before the implementation of code or which do not meet existing, all your seismic safety standards, they can either be rebuilt or reconstructed or strengthened or retrofitted, okay, to improve their performance. So it is neither practical nor feasible to demolish all of these buildings and construct new buildings meeting seismic standards. And therefore, practical approach to increasing seismic safety standard is to strengthen and upgrade their level of safety. So people, what they normally do is just repair, you patch up the cracks, defects, falls, you repair glass, all of that is just repair. Okay. Now this is what is done. Okay. Repair. This is what people do. They just replaster, repair, rearrange whatever has been done or redecoration. Okay. Now repair only addresses only the architectural damages. It does not restore the original strength of the cracked walls or columns. Okay, so a repaired building, it may look very nice because it will hide all the weaknesses. Okay, but if you have a repeat occurrence, these were the ones which will suffer more damage. Okay, so this is what most often people do. They just repair. Some people carry out restoration, structural repairs to load bearing elements. Okay, they provide temporary support, struts. Okay, that's what if you go to Patan Darbar, that's what they did. They added the struts and supports, and now they're actually going ahead and doing a full renovation. Okay, so you're reinforcing. Some people can add some material into it. But the best way is retrofitting, which is called as seismic strengthening. Okay, retrofitting is it's an improvement over the original strength when the evaluation of the building indicates that the strength available before the damage was insufficient and restoration alone will not be adequate in future quakes. Okay, so this is seismic strengthening and retrofitting. Increasing the lateral strength by reinforcing, increasing wall area, number of walls, columns, giving unity to the structure, providing a proper connection between all the resisting elements. Okay, so you can all have, this is all part of retrofitting. Okay, so this is what they do, something that just connects all through additional reinforcement. Okay, so these are all engineering elements. And so you need to get in experts and you need to work with them in order to retrofit. Okay, so basically if there are pillars, they will look at the width and they will try to bolster those pillars, columns, improve thickness, and you can have struts, you can have metal vertical bends, okay, connectors, so that they will help to distribute the load. Okay, and encasing around window or door openings, all of these are part of retrofitting. So this is the retrofitting process. Okay, now a little flashback. Gorkha earthquake 2015, as you can see, a huge number of lives were claimed. But if again, mortality is just the tip, look at the number of people who are injured. Look at the number of buildings that collapsed. Okay, and these are the ones that were partially damaged. Okay, now this highlights the need for preparation of the National Building Code. So following this, they had a National Building Code which they brought out, but again very difficult because people do not want to implement it. Okay, so that was about disaster mitigation. Now we are looking at disaster preparedness. Measures which enable governments, organizations, communities, and individuals to respond rapidly and effectively to disaster situations are called as disaster preparedness. Okay, it's a students sometimes find it a little difficult to understand what is the difference, how you're differentiating between mitigation. So mitigation is you're looking at hazards and you have very specific ways by which you're going to address a hazard. Okay, that is a structural measure or you have a non-structural measure. Okay, these are very specific. Okay, similar to what is the difference between health promotion and specific protection. Okay, so think of disaster mitigation as being like specific protection. There are specific measures which you can use to handle. Okay, and you're reducing the risk. Disaster preparedness has to deal with your plans and all the things that you have in place. Okay, so preparedness measures means first you evaluate risk, you formulate viable disaster plans, you maintain resources, you have to train personnel. Okay, now we are all aware of that we have. Okay, for example, if you look even in our hospital setting, in our building, we have these water hydrants. Okay, we have, in case there's a fire, okay, you have to take this glass and open it out. Okay, but very often you don't have drills which happen around it. So even if you open, there may not be water in that. Okay, because we don't have water in the storage upstairs, or you don't have the equipment working. So even when you have these kind of safety measures available, you need to keep having drills in order to ensure that they are working. Okay, so that is why it's important that you have maintenance of resources and also training of personnel on how to use those resources. Okay, we have to have organized your IEC cell and also as well as have a good warning system. Okay, so this is all preparedness. Okay, so disaster preparedness, you have plans of action for when the disaster strikes are developed. So you have, before the disaster strike, you have a plan for action. You know who is responsible, who is going to take, who are the people who are your first responders, who are the next level of responders. You have to have a trigger mechanism. What are the people who need to be kept, maintained? Who is going to direct all your efforts? Okay, who is going to monitor all of the disaster relief activities? All of that should be there. Okay, there has to be proper maintenance and training of emergency services. You have to have evacuation plans. You have to have disaster simulation exercises. All of this is preparedness. Okay, so you have to have proper emergency shelters, stockpiling of supplies and equipment. Okay, development and practice of multi-agency coordination, that is all important. And we all know how important this is, because now we are seeing how in countries also, vaccine, first of all, it was a miracle that within a year we had a vaccine which was available. At the same time, that countries which are rich and which were affordable are the ones who took those first share of vaccines. Okay, and that's why you have high levels of vaccine coverage in countries that are rich. Okay, and it's only because the WHO has been making noise about equity for the correction, and we also are having neighboring countries who are going beyond their thing and providing vaccines, that vaccines are coming to low and middle income countries. Okay, because if it was just who was able to afford it, then we would be the last people to get it. Okay, so therefore we have these vaccine initiatives. You have this COVAX initiative that the WHO has put together just to ensure an equitable distribution. Okay, otherwise people who have money will grab everything. So there has to be development practice of multi-agency coordination. And you can see the effort that is being put in by all your international agencies during this pandemic. Okay, now this is important. This was a campaign which was run in 2008 and 2009. And this was a campaign which looked at keeping hospitals safe from disasters. So the tagline was reduce risk, protect health facilities, and save lives. Okay. Because as you can see, in the background, these are pictures of all your healthcare facilities which have collapsed during an earthquake. Okay, so if you have health facilities which collapse during an earthquake, where are the patients going to go to? Okay, then you will have to have shelters being put up even for the doctors as well as for the healthcare workers as well as for the patients. Okay, and your temporary shelters you'll have to take care. Okay, so these are real life situations, and therefore this focus. Okay. So the focus was on safe structures. So the cost of protection is negligible when it is included in the design stage. Okay, now the later the process, the more expensive it becomes. So all hospitals, healthcare facilities need to have building codes. Okay, you need to follow those codes. Now, another thing is functional collapse, not structural damage, is the usual reason for hospitals being put out of service during disasters. So protecting non-structural contents of most hospitals will cost only around 1% of the cost of the whole facility, while protecting up to 90% of its value. So therefore, it has to be built into the design. So it has to be safe, it has to be functioning. Okay. And the staff have to be prepared. That is why disaster management is being taken for all levels of healthcare workers, okay? So that the staff are prepared. Hospital failure, health system disruption during disasters is just as often due to system overload and lack of contingency planning than physical failure. So contingency planning, staff training is as important as physical protection, and it costs even more lesser. Now, all of these are recent trends and advances in technology which helps us with early warning systems for disasters. Okay, so you can have the GIS, okay, geographical information system, remote sensing, okay, meteorological department. I'm sure all of you are aware about the jokes regarding the meteorological department and their predictions that if they say that it's going to rain, you can be sure not to take your umbrella. And they say they where they don't predict, it will come. Okay, so those are hopefully things of the past, and most of us know that we kind of tune in to BBC, okay, Met report when we want more accurate, okay, because they have a track record of having very accurate predictions because they use very advanced systems, okay. And now these are what should be available to across so that we can have early warning, okay. Now earthquakes cannot be predicted, we all know that, but many times animal behavior can help, okay, and therefore you'll find the wisdom of the elders, okay, who come in. The locals know, oh, you have snakes coming out of their bill, that means there's something going to happen under the earth, okay. Flood forecasting, cyclone tracking, these are all recent trends that help in early warning for disasters. Okay, so this is how technology can help to save lives. Okay. Now, this is a disaster management exercise that I have for you. I've completed this module for you on disaster management. I want you to read what are the personal protective measures, what are the do's and don'ts during an earthquake and during a flood. Okay. And this is the assignment that I have for you. Please write this in your green files. And once you do that, when you come during your practical posting, you can get it signed by me. Okay. So your assignment is, there's a reading assignment that you have and a written assignment, okay? So I want you to answer this question. What are hazards? Classify the different types of disasters that Nepal is vulnerable to. That is one question. Your second question is prepare a disaster management plan for the flooding that occurs in the Tarai region. What measures, the third question is, what measures for earthquake preparedness and mitigation do we need to implement in the Kathmandu Valley? Okay. So these are the three questions that you will write, and I want you to read about the do's and don'ts during an earthquake and flooding. Okay, this is your personal reading assignment. All right. Are there any questions that the students have? And I'll be happy to answer.